All right, this is to help you reading pages 418 through 422, the first reading from the section that we're going to be dealing with evolution. So when we're doing a reading, make sure that you label the tops of your page with the page numbers, the date, and the title of the section, Darwin's Theory of Evolution by Natural Selection. All right, once you have your title on your notes, let's take a little bit of a text walk so that we know what we're going to be getting into. That's always a good habit to do that. So the title is Darwin's Theory of Evolution by Natural Selection, and then we're going to take a look at all the other headers and any pictures. So developing the theory of evolution, and then underneath there subheaders are Darwin on the HMS Beagle, the Galapagos Islands. Over on the next page there is an image of a map, and it's got some animals on it drawn, and then the next headings down below that. Darwin continued his studies. Turn the page. We have a heading that is titled Natural Selection. Over on the next page there's a visualizing natural selection figure. That's a really good figure. You definitely should go through and read that. It shows the process of natural selection illustrated with steps. That's a really good thing to include in your notes. And then finally on page 422, the title of the section is The Origin of Species. All right, so now I will read through. I want you to follow along while I'm doing the reading, but then please pause and include notes whenever you need to. Okay, so when Charles Darwin, shown in figure 1, boarded the HMS Beagle in 1831, the average person thought that the world was about 6,000 years old. Almost everyone, including young Darwin, thought that animals and plants were unchanging. The concept of gradual change over time was still years away. Darwin on the Beagle. The primary mission of the Beagle was to survey the coast of South America, so that's the boat that he was on. In 1831, the Beagle set sail from England for Madeira and then proceeded to South America as shown in the map in figure 2. Darwin's role on the ship was as a naturalist companion to the captain. His job was to collect biological and geological specimens during the ship's travels. Darwin had a degree in theology from Christ's College, Cambridge, although he previously had studied medicine and all the sciences. Over the course of the ship's 5-year voyage, Darwin made extensive collections of rocks, fossils, plants, and animals. He also read a copy of Charles Lyell's Principles of Geology, a book proposing that Earth was millions of years old. The book influenced his thinking as he observed the fossils of marine life at high elevations in the Andes, unearthed giant fossil versions of smaller living mammals, and saw how earthquakes could lift rocks great distances very quickly. In 1835, the Beagle arrived in the Galapagos Islands off the coast of South America. Darwin was initially disappointed by the stark bareness of these volcanic islands. However, as he began to collect mockingbirds, finches, and other animals on the 4 islands that he visited, he noticed that the different islands seemed to have their own slightly different varieties of animals. These differences, however, only sparked a mere curiosity. He took little notice of the comment from the colony's vice-governor that the island's origins of the giant tortoises could be identified slowly on appearances of the tortoise's shells. Okay, I gotta move over here. Okay, move into this area. Okay, there we go. A few years after Darwin returned to England, he began reconsidering his observations. He took note of the work of John Gould, an ornithologist who was classifying the birds Darwin brought back from the Galapagos. Gould discovered that the Galapagos finches were separate species and determined that the finches of the Galapagos did not live anywhere else in South America. In fact, almost every specimen that Darwin had collected on the islands was new to European scientists. These new species most closely resembled species from mainland South America, although the Galapagos and the mainland had different environments. Island and mainland species should not have resembled one another closely unless, as Darwin began to suspect, populations from the mainland changed after reaching the Galapagos. All right, Darwin continued his studies. Darwin hypothesized that new species could appear gradually through small changes in ancestral species, but he could not see how a process would work. To understand it better, he turned to animal breeders, pigeon breeders in particular. Different breeds of pigeons have certain distinctive traits and are that are also present in the broods of offspring. A brooder can promote these traits by selecting and breeding pigeons that have the most exaggerated expressions of those traits. For example, to produce pigeons with fan-shaped tails, a breeder would breed pigeons with the most fan-shaped tails. The process of directed breeding to produce offspring with desired traits, referred to as selective breeding, was called artificial selection by Darwin. Artificial selection also occurs when humans develop new breeds of dogs or new strains of crop plants. Darwin inferred that if humans could change species by artificial selection, then perhaps the same process could work in nature. Further, Darwin thought that, given enough time, perhaps the process could produce new species. All right, turn the page. All right, natural selection. While thinking about artificial selection, Darwin read an essay by economist Thomas Malthus. The essay suggested that the human population, if unchecked, eventually would outgrow its food supply, leading to competitive struggle for existence. Darwin realized that Malthus's idea could be applied to the natural world. He reasoned that some competitors in the struggle for existence would be better equipped for survival than others. Those less equipped would die. This process of natural selection. Here, finally, was the framework for a new theory about the origin of species. Darwin's theory of evolution by natural selection has 4 basic principles that explain how traits of a population can change over time. First, individuals in the population show differences or variations. Second, variations can be inherited, meaning they're passed down from parent to offspring. Third, organisms have more offspring than can survive on available resources. The average cardinal, for example, lays 9 eggs each summer. If each baby cardinal survived and reproduced just once, it would take only 7 years for the first pair to have produced 1 million birds. Finally, variations that increase reproductive success will have a greater chance of being passed on than those that do not increase reproductive success. If having a fantail helps a pigeon reproduce successfully, future generations would include more pigeons with fan-shaped tails. Given enough time, natural selection could modify a population enough to produce a new species. Natural selection is now considered the mechanism by which evolution takes place. Figure 3 shows how natural selection might modify a population of sunflowers. Okay, so let's take a look at that figure, because this is something that you definitely should include these examples in the notes. Okay, so figure 3, natural selection is the mechanism which, if given enough time, a population, in this case a population of sunflowers, could be modified to produce a new species. There are 4 principles of natural selection that explain how this can occur: variability, heritability, overpopulation, and reproductive advantage. Okay, so we start out with variation. Individuals in a population differ from one another. For example, some sunflowers are taller than others. Second is heritability. Variations are inherited from parents. Tall sunflowers produce tall sunflowers, and short sunflowers produce short sunflowers. Overproduction. Populations produce more offspring than can survive. Each sunflower has hundreds of seeds, most of which will not germinate. And then finally, reproductive advantage. Some variations allow these organisms that persevere to have more offspring than the organism that does not possess them. For example, in this case, shorter sunflowers reproduce more successfully. Over time, the average height of the sunflower population is short if the short wildflowers continue to reproduce successfully. After many generations, the short sunflowers might become a new species if they're unable to breed with the original sunflowers. Okay, turn the page, one more page. All right, so we need the origin of species. Get my pad, here we go. All right, the origin of species. Darwin had likely formulated his theory of evolution by natural selection by about 1840. Soon after, he began writing a multi-volume book compiled of evidence for evolution and explaining how natural selection might provide a mechanism for the origin of species. Table 1 summarizes the principles of natural selection described in Darwin's work. He continued to compile evidence in support of the theory for many years. For example, he spent 8 years studying the relationships among barnacles. In 1858, Alfred Russel Wallace, another English naturalizer, proposed a theory that was almost identical to Darwin's theory. Both men's ideas were presented to the Linnean Society of London. 1 year later, Darwin published On the Origin of Species by Means of Natural Selection, a condensed version of the book he started many years before. In his book, Darwin used the term evolution only on the last page. Today, biologists use the term evolution to define the cumulative changes in groups of organisms through time. Natural selection is not synonymous with evolution. It is a mechanism by which evolution occurs.